A low rumble rolled across the open fields long before Maria Bolton spotted the first jagged flash of lightning. She was already drenched to the bone, sleeves plastered to her arms as she sprinted between fence posts, lashing down loose gates to keep her herd safe. The summer afternoon had turned vicious in minutes. Warm sunlight gave way to slate-gray clouds, and the wind whipped prairie grass into frantic waves. Just as she finished battening the last stall door, a stallion's frantic whinny cut through the storm's roar. Maria froze and turned, her heart pounding as she scanned the flooded pasture. There, huddled against the corral fence, was a young Mustang Foal, its dark coat streaked with mud, legs trembling like saplings in a gale. The colt's wide eyes reflected the strobe-light sky, and each thunderclap sent it rearing, hooves crashing against the soaked earth. Maria's breath caught. She knew the water was rising fast. Several low spots in the field were already under 2 inches of icy runoff. If the foal stayed out there, it would be swept away in the next surge or break a leg in the slippery muck. With no time to lose, she kicked off her rubber boots and waded into the sodden grass, rain sluicing down her face. Every step was a struggle. Waterlogged mud sucked at her feet and threatened to pull her under. The foal caught sight of her and bolted, tiny hooves pounding through puddles, kicking up gray spray. "Easy, easy," Maria called, voice hoarse but calm. She retrieved a battered feed bucket from her shoulder, stashed earlier for emergencies, and shook it hard. The clatter of grain was faint beneath the thunder, but when the colt paused, nose quivering, she broke off, tossing handfuls of soaked oats onto the fence rail. It was a gamble approached too quickly, and the frightened colt could bolt into deeper water. Yet hunger overcame fear. The foal edged closer, panting, flanks heaving with exertion. Maria dropped to one knee, extending her hand with gentle authority. A splintered wooden post jabbed her ribs, but she ignored the pain. Inch by careful inch, the foal lowered its head, nibbled the oats, then allowed her to loop a length of rope, her makeshift halter, around its slender muzzle. As another crack of thunder rattled the sky, Maria tightened her grip on the lead rope. With the colt at her side, she took a deep breath of storm-chilled air and waded back toward the barn, determination burning in her chest. She had risked everything, her safety, her livelihood, to reach this stranded foal. But as the storm howled overhead, Maria knew she would stop at nothing to save a life as fragile and precious as the prairie itself. Maria pressed the damp rope against her side and inched closer to the trembling foal, her voice a soft murmur against the storm's fury. Each step was deliberate, her boots squelching in the rising water as she kept her body low to appear less threatening. The colt's ears flicked back and forth, its muscles coiled to bolt at the slightest provocation. Still, the warm smell of the soaked oats on the fence rail drew it forward. Maria met its gaze with steady brown eyes and whispered encouragement, letting the rhythm of her words become a lifeline in the chaos of wind and rain. Once the colt's muzzle brushed her outstretched hand, Maria slipped the rope loop over its head like a ribbon falling into place. Her fingers trembled as she tightened the crude halter knot, careful not to pinch its sensitive skin. The foal snorted and pulled back, but hunger and exhaustion won out over fear. Its hooves churned thick mud as it took one tentative step toward the barn. Maria mirrored every sway of its body, her heart pounding at the responsibility she'd assumed in that single moment. Leading the colt across the pasture felt like guiding a ship through a maelstrom. Halfway to the barn, a sudden gust sent Maria spinning, but she held firm, wrapping her other arm around the foal's neck to steady them both. Water cascaded off the colt's back in rivulets, its coat matted with grass and grit. Maria murmured reassurances as she coaxed it through a low gate and into the relative shelter of the barn's lean-to extension, its tin roof dripping icy droplets onto the dusty floor. Inside, the sharp scent of hay and the warmth of a stalled heater greeted them like an embrace. Maria shut the heavy wooden door against the wind and unfastened the makeshift halter. The foal's legs wobbled beneath it, knees trembling as it tried to find purchase on the straw-strewn boards. Maria knelt and gently ran her hands along its legs, brushing away clods of mud and checking for cuts or swollen joints. Each careful stroke of her palms revealed healthy warmth beneath the cold filth, a sign that life still pulsed strongly in those slender limbs. Next, Maria set to work on drying and warming the colt. She fetched a stack of clean towels and wrapped them around its limbs, pressing the fabric into every crevice. With practiced care, she turned on the heater and arranged a barrier of bales to block any drafts. As the foal's breathing slowed and its shivers abated, Maria prepared a second bucket of fresh oats mixed with warm water. She held it at chest height, watching the colt's hesitant first licks turn into eager gulps. Each sound of slurping oats was a note of victory against the storm outside. In the golden glow of the barn lantern, Maria sat beside the colt on a bale of straw, stroking its damp mane and humming an old lullaby her mother once sang. The foal's head settled against her shoulder, its large eyes closing in trust. All around them the wind raged, but in that small, hay-scented sanctuary, two lives bound by chance found solace in one another. Maria pressed her cheek to the foal's, whispering a promise born of necessity and hope. She would stand by this wild heart, no matter how fierce the next storm might be. Maria moved with quiet urgency through the dim barn, lantern light dancing off the rafters as she prepared her makeshift infirmary. The foal, drenched and trembling from the night's ordeal, stood with legs splayed on the straw, each hoof coated in layers of mud and grit. Maria knelt and gently lifted one foreleg, inspecting the coronet band for abrasions. A shallow cut on the pastern oozed a thin rivulet of blood and slurry. First, she rinsed the wound with warm water heated on her small camp stove, careful to keep the foal's head cradled against her shoulder so it wouldn't panic. Then, mixing a paste of powdered comfrey known for its soothing, cell-regenerating properties with a touch of honey to discourage flies, Maria spread the salve over the raw skin. She wrapped the lower leg in a clean towel, securing it with strips of soft cotton torn from an old sheet. The foal stamped and shifted, but Maria's gentle murmurs, "Easy now, you're safe," kept it from bolting. With the first injury tended, she repeated the process on the opposite leg, each touch building the foal's trust. As she worked, she talked softly of the coming spring grass, of warm sunshine and open prairies, things the colt could scarcely imagine beneath the storm-black sky. By the time she finished, the barn heater's coil glowed red and a layer of steam rose from the soaked hay. Maria led the foal to a dry corner strewn with fresh straw, draping a thick wool blanket over its flanks. She poured a second bucket of warmed oats, richer this time with a splash of molasses, and watched as the colt lowered its head to eat, the rhythm of its chewing slowing its ragged breathing. Night settled in around them. Maria found a bale to rest upon and spread her own coat beneath her. Though exhaustion tugged at her eyelids, she stayed awake, leaning close to the foal and stroking its neck. When the colt dozed, Maria hummed an old lullaby her mother's voice carried on the wind of memory. The soft melody filled the barn, weaving comfort through the lantern's glow. At dawn's first light, the foal stirred, its eyes brighter, legs steadier. Maria sat beside it, brushing dried mud from its coat and smiling as it nuzzled her hand in gentle thanks. In those shared hours of healing and tender care, the wild colt's heart softened, and Maria's own resolve to save this life grew stronger than any storm that might follow. By mid-morning the rain had finally cleared, leaving the pasture drenched and glistening under a pale sun. Maria led the colt, now named Stormwatcher, for the night they first met, through the barn door and into the wide expanse of the paddock. Fresh straw crunched beneath her boots, and Stormwatcher's new hoof boots clicked softly on the damp ground. Maria carried a looped training rope and a small pouch of crushed oats, her heart fluttering with both excitement and nerves. Today they would take their first true steps toward partnership. She began with the simplest exercise, standing side by side. She let the rope slack at her feet and encouraged the foal with a gentle, steady voice. "Stand here, boy," she murmured, resting her hand on his shoulder. Stormwatcher shifted uneasily at first, ears flicking at distant crows and the soft tinkling of a wind chime on the barn eave. Maria held her ground, stroking his neck until his muscles relaxed and his tail swished in contentment. The small victory shone in his bright eyes, trust growing stronger with each calm breath. Next came walking on the lead. Maria tightened her grip slightly and began to move forward, her steps measured and slow. Stormwatcher hesitated, planting his front hoof in a puddle, then followed Maria's rhythm as she had taught him. Each time he stumbled or lagged behind, she paused, spoke softly, "Easy, easy," and offered a handful of oats as a reward. Gradually his stride lengthened, and soon they were looping the perimeter of the fence, a dance of human and colt finding harmony beneath the open sky. Encouraged, Maria introduced a simple obstacle, a low wooden pole laid across the grass. She coaxed Stormwatcher toward it, tapping the pole with her foot as an invitation. The colt paused, then lifted a tentative hoof over the pole and stepped down on the other side. Maria clapped her gloved hands softly, her laughter bright in the morning air, and fed him another treat. Over the next hour she raised the pole slightly, then lowered it again, letting Stormwatcher build confidence at his own pace. With each successful leap, his prancing grew more exuberant, and Maria felt tears of pride sting her cheeks. As the sun climbed higher, a few of Maria's neighbors ambled by to admire the colt's progress. They stood at the fence, applauding as Stormwatcher executed a perfect pivot on command and approached Maria's outstretched hand. One local youth, a shy boy named Pedro, timidly asked if he might try guiding the colt. Maria nodded, stepping back as Pedro gripped the rope. Under her watchful eye, Pedro led Stormwatcher in a figure-8 pattern, the colt's steps sure and steady. The boy beamed, and Maria felt the warmth of community bloom around them. By late afternoon, the paddock exercises ended with a cooling-down walk along the edge of the marshy screening grasses. Stormwatcher's coat gleamed in the slanting light, and his eyes followed Maria's every movement, full of affectionate loyalty. As they returned to the barn, Maria draped a fresh blanket over his back and whispered, "You did brilliant today." The colt nuzzled her shoulder, and Maria knew that through patience, kindness, and mutual respect, they had forged something rare, a partnership born in a storm and tempered beneath open skies, one that would carry them both forward, together, into whatever challenges lay ahead. Spring light filtered through the paddock fence as Maria led Stormwatcher toward the open gate that separated her ranch from the rolling prairie beyond. The air was sweet with fresh grass and blooming wildflowers, and the distant lowing of cattle mingled with the soft rustle of wind through sagebrush. Maria's heart throbbed with bittersweet anticipation. Today she would reunite the colt with its wild kin. A few neighbors and Pedro, the shy boy who helped train Stormwatcher, gathered near the gate to witness the farewell. They stood quietly, respectful of the bond Maria and the colt had forged. In her hands she held a lead rope, now coiled and unnecessary, while Stormwatcher stood tall, his flank glossy and his eyes bright with curiosity. Around them, the herd grazed at the prairie's edge, a dozen wild mustangs, their manes tangled by the wind and coats dusted gold by the sun. Maria knelt beside Stormwatcher and stroked his neck, remembering the night the storm drove her into the flooded pasture. "You came to me when you had nowhere else to go," she whispered, voice thick with emotion. "Now it's time for you to find your place among them." Stormwatcher nickered softly, pressing his muzzle against her shoulder in a farewell nuzzle. Standing, Maria nodded to Pedro. With a firm yet gentle motion, he released Stormwatcher's headstall. The colt hesitated, lifting one hoof as if weighing his decision, then turned toward the waiting herd. The mustangs lifted their heads in unison, ears flicking as the newcomer approached. A sleek mare, her coat a rich, mahogany dapple, stepped forward, nostrils flaring as she sniffed Stormwatcher's flank. A soft snort passed between them, and the mare edged closer, welcoming the colt into the fold. Maria watched as Stormwatcher merged seamlessly into the herd, matching pace with the mare's confident stride. One of the stallions stamped the ground, as though affirming the colt's place in the new group. The mustangs flicked their tails and moved off across the meadow, a living wave of powerful limbs and flowing manes. Stormwatcher's graceful head dipped into the tall grass, and Maria felt tears warm her cheeks. Pedro slipped an arm around Maria's waist. "He's home, Miss Bolton," he said softly. She nodded, drawing in the fresh prairie air. In that moment, every sacrifice, the sleepless nights in the barn, the aching muscles, the relentless rain, felt honored by the colt's freedom. Later, Maria returned to her ranch house and nailed a single, polished horseshoe above the door. Its silver curve glinted in the afternoon sun, a talisman of hope and renewal. Inside, the barn felt both emptier and fuller. Though Stormwatcher's presence was gone, his memory lingered in every corner of the straw-strewn stalls. That evening, as Maria sat on her porch with a cup of cooling tea, the horizon glowed with twilight's amber haze. In the distance she heard hoofbeats, wild mustangs returning to their nocturnal pasture, and she whispered a final promise into the wind, to protect the land that had sheltered both her and the colt, and to cherish every life, wild or tame, that called it home. And so, beneath the vast expanse of prairie sky, a colt once stranded by a storm found his herd, and a farmer found her purpose renewed in the circle of life she helped complete.